Following the War of 1812, the United States is going to experience a period of economic growth. We're also going to see a lot more Americans start moving west of the Appalachian Mountains into these areas like the Louisiana Territory that the United States had recently acquired. The reasons for this westward expansion and this economic growth are going to vary based on region. In the north, we're going to see a number of factors lead people to move west, and we're going to see a number of reasons for the northern economy to grow, and these reasons are going to be very different than what we're going to see southerners move west for, and we're going to see the southern economy grow. So basically, to talk about this economic growth and westward expansion, we need to focus on these two different regions, because right at this time we're going to see this huge disparity start to emerge between these two regions, and we're going to see this disparity will lead to political conflict in the future. Alright, so why is the North going to experience economic growth and westward expansion? It's incredibly complicated, but a lot is going to owe to changes in national politics. As we talked about before, Henry Clay is starting to push through this American system. Part of this means increasing the tariff on incoming manufactured goods. So anytime a British shoe shows up on a dock in Boston, an American duty collector is going to make sure to collect a high duty off of it. So when that shoe then goes on sale in Boston stores, Americans are going to see it, and then they're going to see this American shoe that doesn't have this duty placed on it. They're going to buy the American shoe. This is going to allow these American factories to sell more shoes, and then once you sell more shoes, you can start buying machines, you can start hiring new workers, and pretty soon you're going to be able to compete with the British manufacturer in shoes. So this tariff is going to lead more and more people to start industrialize. Also, Henry Clay's American system, we talked about the National Bank. You're going to see a lot of Northerners, these entrepreneurs, that want to do things like start a toll road, start a new factory, but they don't have the upfront capital to do it. Well, a lot of these guys are now going to be able to go to this second bank of the United States, borrow some money, and then start their projects. So a little bit of it's going to owe to the changes at the national level. Others are going to owe to these broad changes in society as a whole. As a matter of fact, in the early 1800s, the United States is going to be going through something called the Market Revolution. Now, we've talked about some interesting revolutions here. The American Revolution, the French Revolution, the Haitian Revolution. These things were crazy. They were violent. They were dramatic in the changes that occurred from them. They were revolutionary in that they changed people's lives, and there was this violent process to carry them out. Well, the revolutions we're about to talk about, starting with the Market Revolution, are not nearly going to be as interesting as far as why they occur, how they occur, but the results are going to be just as dramatic. So this Market Revolution is an incredibly broad term, but it can be symbolized in this picture here, which is of New York in the early 1800s. What's going to begin to happen for most Americans is you're going to see Americans start to purchase things at the market more than producing them at home. Okay, so you go back to the 1700s, very early years of the 1800s. The vast majority of Americans are what you would call subsistence farmers. They grow their own food. So, you know, dad's a farmer, goes out there with the help of the kids. They grow some corn, they raise some cattle. They're going to get the beef from the cattle, the milk that they drink from the cattle. They're going to eat the corn, the wheat, all that kind of stuff. They're going to produce what they consume. They're going to make their own furniture. They're going to build their own home. You're basically self-sufficient. Occasionally, you know, the average American farmer would produce a little bit in surplus, maybe trade this to the neighbor who has, you know, certain crops, apples or something that you don't grow on your farm, and you get that through a local trade. Well, some Americans, 1700s, early 1800s, particularly the wealthy, what they would do is they would start, instead of producing the stuff themselves, they would produce in surplus, and they would sell the surplus to cities or to Europe, something like that, and then they would make capital from it. They would get Spanish coins and then later on United States manufactured coins, and they would use these coins to buy what they need, buy their food, buy their the goods from the market. You're going to see this happen to the American public. They're going to start doing this as well, and this is going to happen in a number of ways. To Americans who are going to be living in cities and up through the Civil War, the vast majority of Americans are going to be living in rural areas, be agricultural in nature, but there are some Americans in cities. What you're going to see is more and more Americans living in cities, and they're going to be working for a wage. Again, this is what most of us probably do in modern times. We work for a wage. We do one job, and then at the end of the week, month, whatever, we get a paycheck, and then we meet our basic needs through this paycheck. We pay our rent, we buy our food, things like that. We're wage laborers. We work for a wage, and then we use this wage to meet our needs. There's not very many Americans that fit under that bill prior to the early 1800s. You do have a couple factories, but what we're going to see is more and more Americans are going to become wage laborers. At the same time, you're going to see a lot more farmers start producing things in surplus. So instead of growing a variety of different crops to meet your family's needs, so you've got the cow over here, you're raising pigs over here, you've got wheat over here, you've got corn over here, apple orchard back there, and you're basically producing all your different calories, your nutritional needs. What we're going to see more and more farmers start doing is start specializing in single crops. So we'll have farmers, instead of growing wheat, corn, cattle, pigs, they'll just grow wheat. That's all they're going to grow. One crop, and because they're going to do this one crop, they're going to get really good at it. You're going to have be a lot more efficient because this is all you ever do. You're going to be able to buy the best equipment to harvest your crops. You're going to be able to do it much quicker than you used to. And so you're going to be able to produce this in bulk. You then take this crop, single crop, maybe one or two crops, and you take this to the market and you sell it, and the profit you get from this single crop, then you're going to use that to buy your corn, to buy your vegetables, to buy your beef, whatever. You're going to specialize in one crop, and you're going to go to the market to meet your needs. This doesn't sound crazy to us today because this is the way things work, but for most Americans prior to this market revolution, 1700s and before, and then into the early 1800s, most Americans made and produced the stuff that they consumed. That's going to change. So we're going to see this market revolution taking over in the early 1800s. Now, within this market revolution, I know it's kind of boring, but within the market revolution and contributing to this market revolution are going to be a number of other revolutions. We're going to see these revolutions, this industrial revolution, transportation revolution. We're going to see these revolutions are going to contribute to the market revolution, and the fact that more people are buying at the store are going to sort of feed back into these lower revolutions. So think about this market revolution as something that broadly encompasses all these different things that are going to be changing in the early 1800s. So why are more and more Americans going to be buying at the store rather than producing their own needs? Well, I mean, before we even get into the specifics, it kind of just makes sense, because if you buy something, a piece of furniture at the store, instead of taking 10 days out of the year to build your own furniture, the one you get at the store is probably going to be better because it's from a specialist. Just like the guy, if you're producing wheat, you're probably producing better quality wheat than somebody could do if they're just devoting a couple days a year to it. You specialize in something, it's generally a better product, and you can get it for cheaper. So, I mean, part of it's just the idea of the market is better. You get better stuff out of it. But part of this push towards selling more stuff at the market and buying more stuff at the market is going to come from improvements in transportation. So in the early 1800s, we're going to see that throughout the United States, but specifically in the North, and this is going to be primarily focusing on northern states, we're going to see that state governments will start investing in infrastructure. Now, this is going to happen in southern states a tiny bit, but northern states are going to invest in infrastructure improvements in their states. Now, again, the national government had talked about getting into infrastructure projects, but they hadn't been able to get that through Congress and get president's approval for it because a lot of people thought it was unconstitutional. So while the national government is not going to do it, state governments are going to do it. So New York will raise taxes on certain things. They're going to take this tax money, invest in infrastructure. New Hampshire, same thing. Massachusetts, same thing. These various states will take on these projects that are too much for private individuals to take on, and we're going to see massive transportation improvements, and we're going to see a dramatic reduction in travel times in the United States, and in particular in northern states. So why is the United States going to go through this transportation revolution in the early 1800s? So what we're going to be leading to, by the way, is this. So this is the average travel time from New York to places like the Northwest Territory. We talked about the War of 1812, hard for soldiers to get out to this region. This is just a single individual traveling. It takes a month and a half to get all the way out to Michigan from New York. If you're trying to get an army out there, imagine how long that would take. But you're going to see that time, just in this particular area of Michigan, is going to be reduced in half in just a period of really 15 years. So this map says 1800 to 1830. It really could say 1815 to 1830, because most of this transportation improvements are going to happen after the War of 1812. All right, so what do we mean by infrastructure improvements? Well, you're going to see states, in particular states in the north, will start doing things like building turnpikes. So if a state government sees that you have two cities, all right, you got one city here, let's say New York City, it's on the coast, a lot of people there, and then you've got a city way far to the west where maybe there's fertile land, it's perfect growing conditions, but there's no nearby rivers, or the rivers are rocky and you can't really get transport across them. Not many people are going to move to this western area, and you're not going to be able to grow any crops there. If you do, maybe you can be self-sufficient off them, but you're not going to be able to sell them back to the east to places like New York. New York's not going to be able to grow because it's not going to have enough food to feed its workers. And so you've got this small western city, and not even a city, a village, that can't grow anymore in spite of, this fertile land around it, because there's no way to get transport to the east. Well, states like New York, New Hampshire, again, northern states in general, will say, man, we can get this western city involved in the economy if we build some roads, okay? So you're going to see this heavy investment in what's called turnpikes. You can think of turnpikes as early versions of highways. What these states will do is they're going to raise taxes, they're going to start purchasing up land going into western areas, and then they're going to hire these crews to clear out these trees, lay down gravel, and create roads between major cities. Again, you'd seen governments do this before, but there's just going to be a heavy investment because a lot of state governments are going to realize that if we're going to profit as a state, we're going to get in more tax money if we grow economically, and the way we can grow economically is to incorporate the western portion of our states. So we're going to start seeing these turnpikes spread all across the United States right after the War of 1812. As a matter of fact, going into the War of 1812, there was 4,600 miles of turnpikes in the United States. By 1830, so essentially 15 years after the War of 1812, that number is going to increase to 27,800. So from 5,000 to 28,000 in just a period of a little bit more than 15 years. This is a map of all the turnpikes that are going to be built. And these aren't just the roads that you would see in the colonial era. I mean, you would see some nice roads in the colonial era, but most of them are just muddy, hard to get through. Now you have these quality roads that, again, are gravel on them. You're not going to get horses stuck in them or anything like that. And so all these cities, like let's go with Harrisburg. Maybe this was a city that was small because get transport to Philadelphia is going to be difficult. Now you're going to have commerce between these two cities because you have this nice road between them, because the state of Pennsylvania invested in infrastructure. So this is going to encourage westward expansion. As the states build more of these things, easier to move out west. And it's going to encourage economic growth. So as you get more trade between the western states and the eastern states, you're going to start seeing, more economic growth. So you've got this improvement in the economy and westward expansion. All right. So in spite of the fact these turnpikes are going to greatly improve travel, they're still going to be limited by the fact that they're on land. All right. So today, whenever we want to go from one place to another, you're probably driving, you're probably flying a plane. If Amazon wants to bring something to your house, they might be throwing it in a semi or just throwing it in a delivery truck. bringing it to your door. Even, you know, the produce, somebody selling produce is going to bring it to the grocery store in a truck. They're not going to bring it, you know, other ways. Well, back in the early 1800s, if you wanted to get something from one place to another, so let's say you are producing wheat and you get this huge wheat crop and you've got all this grain and you're in the western state and you want to get to the east, you might have this nice turnpike, but even on these nice turnpikes, it's going to be very costly to transport stuff from the west to the east, because you're going to need a lot of horses to drag this stuff. You're going to need a lot of carts. If you want to talk physics, the physics of bringing a horse and a buggy across this road, you got to deal with friction. This is going to slow down transport. So you're going to be probably going through a lot of horses, having to buy a lot of horses. You're going to have to be stopping to feed them. You're probably going to be breaking wagon wheels occasionally. And maybe even with a nice turnpike, by the time you get your wheat to market in the east, maybe you're barely making any money. In a perfect situation, you would have a river. And as a matter of fact, almost everybody in the United States prior to this transportation revolution, if they're going from one place to another, is on a river. And rivers, even with nice roads, are going to be 50 times more efficient to travel on, to bring goods on, than roads. Okay, so if you want to bring goods, it's much easier to do it on a river. Well, the problem is rivers don't go anywhere. Like, you look at map of the United States, you've got this area here. Might be the perfect land, might be fertile, there might be mines out there, but you can't do anything about it, because let's say you grow the best crops here. Even if there's a road here, by the time you get to the east on a road, again, you know, the costs outweigh what you're going to profit. So maybe you bring it to the river, but even that's going to add to the cost. So what do you do if there's an area where there's no river and it's, you know, inefficient to travel on these roads? How are you going to get there? Well, what we're going to see is a lot of northern states are going to invest in canals. What they're going to start doing is, again, raising taxes and hiring people to dig ditches between rivers. So they're essentially going to be creating rivers where there aren't any. So let's imagine we've got this area right here. We want to get people moving in there, but nobody's out there. So we know that if we bring a canal here, it's going to open up all this land, because people can now bring their crops to this canal, bring it to the river, then you can bring it out to market on this river. So we're just going to hire a bunch of people, dig a ditch here, and then now we're going to have this waterway. And the way these canals would work is you would just have these barges, you would have them dragged along by these horses, and once they and they'd be dragged along much more efficiently than if they're carrying it overland. So if this were a cart filled with the same amount of goods, the horses, you're going to need 5 times as many horses, and it's going to take 5 times as long. But just the fact that you're dragging it along the river makes it much more efficient. So the northern states are going to realize this, and we're going to see these guys start building these canals all over the place. The biggest of these canals is going to be something called the Erie Canal. So New York's going to raise some taxes and build this Erie Canal, and this thing's going to be especially important because what it's going to do is it's going to connect these Great Lakes to these rivers that go out to New York City. Now, this might not sound like a big deal, but in doing this, you can now, anybody that's on this lake can now travel on water to market in the Atlantic. Okay, so this area right here, nobody would want to move out here prior to these canals, because what you would have to do is you'd have to come up here, then get on an overland road, if there's even roads available before War of 1812. Maybe get on a road though, and then, you know, you're taking such a long time here to get to New York. By the time you get there, transportation costs make everything you're growing, you know, you're not going to make a profit. But now you got this area here. All you got to do is throw yourself on a boat, bring it to a canal, bring it out here, then get on the Hudson, and then go to New York, never having to offload your goods, load them back up onto another water vehicle, then take them to market. You can go on water the whole way, which again is 50 times more efficient than traveling on land. So this is going to open up all of these Great Lakes for settlement. Before this, by the way, if you wanted to get your stuff to market, you could hypothetically go up the St. Lawrence River, but the British aren't going to do that, and this river's rocky, and there are falls and things like that that you would have to get out and drag your boat up there anyway. So this is going to bypass the St. Lawrence. Now you can get your stuff to market on these canals. And again, anywhere there's a canal is now open for settlement. So all this area, maybe there wasn't a river here before, now anybody can move here because you just get your stuff on a canal, bring it to market. So I know this sounds incredibly boring, but it's actually going to be incredibly important. So this Erie Canal in particular, there's something like 10,000 plus people that worked on it. Cost $7 million to build, 363 miles. 1,000 people died in its construction, so I'm betting it was actually more than 7,000 that worked on it in total. But these canals, a lot of times, it's more than a ditch, because what if you have a river that's this level, and then you have another river that's this level? Well, you're going to have to build things like locks. So what you do is you'd have a boat come up to a certain area, you would fill up the water to the river you're connecting to, and then the boat would go along. So there's some complex engineering that went into this as well. Now, this is going to quickly prove its worth for these northern states, because these areas are now going to start feeding people in the east. New York, because it's so heavily invested in these canals, New York City is actually going to become the largest city in the United States. It's going to overtake Boston, and we're going to see this growth continue throughout the 1800s. So cities are going to grow because now they can get food to them, and now you're going to have all this commerce going through these cities. So it's this infrastructure development. Again, it's going to contribute to this transportation revolution. Another thing that's going to contribute to this transportation revolution is something that's going to be developed in 1807, and it's going to become readily available after the War of 1812, and that's something called the steamboat. So this guy right here, steamboat, what this is it basically uses the power of steam to create mechanical energy to move upriver. So if you're going downriver, things are easy. Basically, gravity pulls you down. You go downriver, and you can get wherever you want to go. But if you're going upriver and you don't have any steam energy, you basically got to use rowing, human energy, which requires calories. Maybe you could sort of luck out and the wind's going upriver. The wind can push you upriver, although a lot of times going downriver, it's going to push back against the wind, so you're not going to go anywhere. So maybe you could do that. Again, maybe you could, if the river's sort of shaped well enough, maybe you can drag the boat along side with an animal. But all of these things are really inefficient. So what a steamboat will do is you'll basically take the energy in coal or wood, and you'll convert that into mechanical energy. So you have these boilers, you'll heat up the wood, it heats up the water in these boilers, then turns it into steam. Then you shoot this steam out of these jets, and what the steam then does is it turns these paddle wheels, which can allow you to go upriver just as easily as you can go downriver, or close to as easy as you can go downriver. So now you've taken wood and you've converted it into energy. This is going to be a huge thing for these for everywhere. In particular, we'll talk about northern states. But what this means is that you can now go upriver just as easy, or close to just as easy as you can go downriver. So let's say you're in an area here in Ohio. So you got right here, let's say this would be a perfect fertile place right here. And, if you're sending your stuff to market, it's easy to go downriver because you just send the barges down the Mississippi, get out that way. Or maybe, you get over here and you take one of these new canals, go over that direction. Well, let's say it's before the canals were built. Well, the problem is, you live up here, easy stuff to get to your market, but what if you want something? What if you want a nice good from Europe or from produced in these new factories here in the East Coast? How are you going to get it upriver? This is tough. It's going to take a long time before the steamboat. Now going upriver is going to, again, be almost as easy as going downriver. So this is going to open up a lot of these westward places that are upriver, because now travel is going to become much more efficient with this steamboat. So we're going to see a number of steamboats. In 1815, there are only 7 steamboats in the United States. Couple prototypes, things like that. That number is going to grow to almost 500 right after 1830. So this new invention, this Robert Fulton guy, you don't need to know his name or anything, but he's going to invent this thing that is going to make travel upriver much more efficient. Again, not a huge thing. It doesn't sound like a huge thing, but economically, it's going to increase the amount of area you can trade in, and it's going to promote westward expansion because now people can live in regions and get things to regions they couldn't get to prior, or else it was going to be very difficult, very expensive to get goods to that region. So this is going to decrease travel time and increase commerce. Another part of this transportation revolution, although this is going to be a minor part, is going to be another steam-powered invention that's going to come along in the 1820s, and this is the very early railroad, okay? So I don't want to focus too much on the railroad right now because the ones that are coming out in the 1820s really are experimental. There's not going to be very many of them, but we're going to see this invention where you lay down tracks. Let's say there's no river, it's too expensive to build a canal. All you got to do is lay down these tracks and put this vehicle that, same principle as Steamboat, you heat up wood, coal, and then you create this mechanical energy. It turns this initial train car, and then it's going to pull these goods behind it much more efficiently than you can do it if you're pulling this thing with horses, and probably not as efficient as you could do it on a boat, but very close to as efficient you could do it on a boat. And this is going to open up new land to westward expansion and commerce. So we're going to see a couple miles of this track laid down in the 1820s. Nothing big until really the 1840s, but this is going to contribute, at least in some areas, to reduce travel time. All right. So altogether, canals, the additional railroads, the turnpikes, all these different things mean that it's going to be much, much easier to get from one location to another in 1830 than it was in 1815. And again, you look at this map, you'll see travel times just about anywhere are much reduced. Now, again, northern states are going to be investing in this infrastructure more than southern states. Southern states, in part because it's just they're bigger states and they don't want to invest in it because it's a lot more money, aren't going to build nearly as many turnpikes, barely any canals, but the steamboat's going to contribute to reduced travel times in those areas as well. So altogether, again, just think that things are going to become twice as fast. So just imagine out of nowhere, if you're in DFW, you want to get to Austin today, you're looking at quickest 3 hours, go hop in line, wait on a plane, then you head down there, you maybe get there after all the baggage and all that stuff, you get there in maybe 2 hours, something like that. Well, imagine just out of nowhere, within a period of 10 years, that reduced to 30 minutes. That's basically what's going to happen from 1815 to 1830. And again, all this additional commerce is going to open up as a result. All right, so this is one revolution within this market revolution. Another revolution, and this is something that goes along with the steamboat and the railroad, we're going to see this industrial revolution. Now, you'll hear the term industrial revolution thrown out all over the place. You have this early industrial revolution, this later industrial revolution. So, I'm not talking about any specific industrial revolution, but what you will see at the beginning of the 1800s, late 1700s as well, but you're going to see these inventors start to perfect steam engine power, or steam engines that can produce work that would normally be done by humans in factories, okay? So steam engines been around for a while. Robert Fulton's perfecting his in 1807 for the steamboat, but there have been steam engines really since 1500, something like that. People heating stuff up, creating steam, creating motion out of that steam. And people have been experimenting with some of these steam manufacturing items, steam looms, things like that, 1600s, 1700s. But in the late 1700s, these steam-powered machines are going to start to become a lot more efficient and a lot cheaper than they had ever been. And so what you're going to be able to do is to create mechanical energy without humans powering it, or without animals powering it. So if you were somebody opening a factory or somebody opening a mill, if you wanted to grind corn or grind grain, what you would have to do is you'd probably have to have a human powering the grinder, or you'd have to have maybe a donkey or something like that grinding up or a mule grinding up the stuff, or you'd have to put your factory right along a water source and have a water wheel turning the grinder. Same thing if you're operating a textile factory. If you want to sew something, you could have a human sew it by hand. You could have a loom powered by maybe water wheels, something like that. But you're going to be limited to how fast the river's flowing. You're going to be limited to only being able to establish your factory on a river. But when you start to see these things cheaper, you're going to be able to start becoming more consistent with your factory, because instead of relying on a human to power things, or an animal, or water, you can now get this thing that's going to output the same amount of energy consistently, and you're not going to need to put your stuff by a river. You can just put it wherever you want. As a matter of fact, in 1815, we're going to see our first textile loom built in the United States. I'm sorry, 1814 in Massachusetts, so right outside of Boston. It's a factory depicted here. They also have a water wheel as well, but this is going to be the steam looms are going to be addition to this. And what the steam loom will do is it's going to turn these various machines, and now you can start producing textiles. I mean, you still have to have human workers to sort of feed the thing, but you're going to be able to produce a lot more textiles a lot quicker. And you don't have to be stationed by a river if you just have to buy the loom, feed it coal or wood or whatever, and you can basically have these factories wherever the heck you want. So this is going to be something that's going to contribute to efficiency in American textile industry and other industries as well. So the North is growing economically because it can become more efficient with the addition of this steam machinery. At the same time, you're going to see more and more factories, more and more industrial locations using replaceable parts. So before the 1800s, you would have individual blacksmiths building these machines, and they'd build machines sort of to the specification of the single blacksmith shop. But what you're going to start seeing in the early 1800s is when people build these various looms, they'll build them in one huge factory, and if you have one piece of the loom break down, you don't got to wait until a blacksmith can make a part for that specific loom. You can just go back to the factory and say, hey, send us part number, whatever. So you're going to see this increase efficiency in the North. So you're going to have more people working in factories, or you're going to have, it would seem you would have less people working in these factories. You have machines, but actually what we're going to see is the machines are going to increase efficiency. So you're going to start increasing the amount of textiles you can put out, or whatever you're producing, shoes, something like that. And this is going to make it cheaper, which again is going to contribute to this market revolution. So industry will start to grow in the North, and more people are going to start to work in these factories, and goods are going to start to become cheaper, so more and more people are going to start to get their goods at the market as opposed to making them themselves. So again, you're thinking, what's leading to growth in westward expansion in the North? Industry, steam-powered stuff, investment in infrastructure. Another thing that's going to contribute to this economic growth and westward expansion in the North is a dramatic increase in immigration. Beginning after the War of 1812, from 1815 until 1830. As a matter of fact, from 1815 to 1820, you're going to see tons of people pouring into the United States from Europe, in particular from places like France, some from Germany. A lot of these people are coming over because you're starting to see these jobs developed in the North. So again, we have these new factories open up. They need workers. You're hiring people. Somebody over in Europe hears about them going over there. So we got this pull because of these new jobs opening up. But at the same time, you're going to see a push. And this is one of these things that whenever you talk about mass migration, or a lot of people moving from one area to another at the same time, you're always going to have the pull. In this case, it's going to be jobs opening up with this increased industry, but there's always a push going along with the pull. So a lot of people are going to be moving out of Western Europe to the United States because post-1815, a lot of people are going to look around, particularly in places like France, again, Western Europe, and they're going to say, my life's messed up. And in part, it's messed up because we've gone through decades of war. So beginning 1789 to 1815, Europe's at war for 20 out of 25 years, something like that. Maybe even more than that. a lot of war, and especially a lot of war in this Napoleonic era from the beginning in the 1800s, really 1803 to 1815, constant war throughout Europe. Well, again, Napoleon eventually goes down, and we're going to see not a complete cessation of war, but war is going to reduce after 1815 as Britain becomes a big dog in Europe. In France, still powerful, but not as powerful. But we're going to see a slowing down of this war. All right, well, the problem with the war is that, again, war is going to cause damage. You're going to lose a lot of lives. When one army marches across a field and marches across a farm, they're going to be taking the crops from the poor farmer. You're going to have these battles, and these battles, farmers' houses are going to be destroyed. Soldiers are going to loot. Sons are going to go off to war. Fathers are going to go off to war. They're not going to be able to return to these farms. The farms, you're going to have people struggling to keep them up without the fathers and sons. And war just causes devastation, and it's going to cause famine. As a matter of fact, after 1815, Central Europe, Western Europe, tons of the areas had been battlefields, and you're going to have a lot of people basically looking across, all their crops are burned down, and they're going to, what are my options? My options here are to start all over. Who knows if another war is going to come? These wars keep popping up. Or I can maybe move to this United States where there are these new jobs. You're going to see a lot of people choose to move to the United States because of this famine brought on by this constant war. You're also going to have famine not in Europe in the late 18 teens, not just because of war, but because of this crazy environmental thing that happens in 1815 that kind of sounds insane, but it's going to lead to dramatic immigration to the United States. So what's going to happen in 1815, halfway across the world from Europe, but it's going to cause change in Europe, is there's going to be an explosion, volcanic explosion on this place in what's modern-day Indonesia called Mount Tambora. Mount Tambora was at the time an active volcano, and it's going to erupt. Okay, so it's going to erupt, and when it erupts, it's going to eject volcano stuff, lava, ash, rock, that kind of thing. Now, most volcanoes, if they erupt, it's not going to cause dramatic consequences unless you're immediately under the volcano. Maybe the surrounding area gets overwhelmed, things aren't good there. But, a couple miles away, a couple hundred miles away, nobody even notices that the volcano happened. Well, Mount Tambora, which is going to go off in 1815, certain conditions are going to make it impactful not just to the local area, but to Europe and basically the world economy in general. So what happens with Mount Tambora is that the volcano is especially big. Volcano science stuff. The eruption is just going to have all the eruption stuff going for it that's going to make a large explosion. Now, most volcanoes, even similar explosiveness, they don't turn into anything but a local problem because they're always off 90 degrees by a tiny bit. So instead of being directly straight up, they'll be tilted a little bit, and when there's an eruption, all the lava and junk will just sort of and then sort of go out. Imagine if you're playing Overwatch, which I don't think anybody but me plays nowadays, but your Torbjorn's gun, it sort of goes on this arc, and then you're going to have the ash and volcano, around the volcano, but not anything distant. Well, Mount Tambora is almost 90 degrees, so it's perpendicular to the ground. So when it explodes, the eruption is going to be so strong that it's going to shoot ash into the atmosphere. It's going to shoot ash everywhere, but some ash is actually going to get out into the atmosphere. It's going to escape Earth's gravity. So you're going to have all this particulate floating in the Earth's atmosphere. And I say it's around here. There's some British sailors trading in this region, and they basically said for 3 days we couldn't see our hand in front of our face. The ash is so strong. But a lot of that ash is going to go up into the atmosphere. And once it escapes Earth's gravity, it's going to be orbiting around the Earth for a long period of time. By the way, we know there's a ton of ash because we've gotten these ice cores from Antarctica, and the ice cores, they measure basically snowfall, that kind of stuff every year. The ones for 18, 15, 16, 17, 18 contain a lot more ash because stuff gets in the atmosphere, and it's going to be basically raining down slowly over the course of the next couple years. But it's going to be floating around in the atmosphere for the next couple years. I don't know exactly how this is going to work, but these ash clouds, I guess you can call them, they're going to float over India. They're going to cause a lot of problems there, and it's going to sort of take a while. But 1816, we're going to start seeing this ash cloud float over Europe. So Europe in 1816 is going to experience something that people call the year without a summer. At the time, they didn't know what the heck caused this, but we believe today that it was caused by this volcanic eruption. What happens is this ash cloud gets over Europe, and it's going to block the sun's rays. So imagine basically throws sunglasses on the atmosphere around Europe. Now, without the sun coming down here, you're going to see temperatures in Europe are going to drop dramatically. As a matter of fact, so this is in Celsius, so you would see here 10 degrees Fahrenheit, something like that, roughly something like that. 10 degrees cooler on average for the summer of 1816. You have snow going all the way into June and July during this time, and you've got a lot of sort of shaky weather when the summer comes along. Basically what's going to happen 1816, and this is going to extend into 1817, 1818, is you'll have periods where it will rain for 2 months straight, then it won't rain for 3 months. So crops will be too cold to start growing at the right time. Then maybe when it gets warm enough to grow, they become waterlogged because of so much rain. And then maybe, when things dry out, they don't get any water, so they're not going to grow. So you're going to see crops fail left and right. There's actually a fun story about this pretty horrific time, I guess. But if anybody knows the story behind Frankenstein, basically Mary Shelley, her husband, and another couple, they're in, I think it's Geneva, I'm not 100% sure, but it's 1816. They have to stay in their house because it's constantly raining. There's lightning all over the place, and it just won't stop raining. So they decide to make up horror stories. Mary Shelley looks at the lightning outside. She comes up with this creature that can be brought to life, dead creature can be brought to life with lightning. This is Frankenstein's monster, and so she writes Frankenstein. That's kind of an indirect result of this Mount Tambora eruption, because it leads to this drastic weather. So you have Europe that is now in famine already because of the war that's been going on. These wars have been going on for the past couple decades. Now you have this horrific weather. So people in Europe are going to start dying in droves. And so again, you're going to have this major push out because of this volcanic eruption across the world. At the same time, you've got this pull from these new American factories, and you're going to start seeing these Europeans going to the United States in droves. Again, we're going to see the French immigrants. We're going to see a lot of English immigrants. And as a matter of fact, from 1815 to 1820, more French and English immigrants are going to arrive in the United States than had arrived between 1789, so the start of the constitutional government, in 1815. So more people arrive in 5 years than the past 25, 26 years. So dramatic increase in immigration. Germany as well. You see a lot of people coming from there. Well, these people are going to start coming into these cities where this burgeoning industry is going to be, and this is going to be good for them. Again, you're escaping death, crops failing, the disasters brought on by war in Europe, and you're getting over here. But you're going to see a lot of factory owners, these new people with these new factories starting up. They see these immigrants as cheaper labor than the native-born American workers. So you have this guy, maybe he was one of these early wage laborers, been working in a factory for a while. Well, 1816, he sees this French worker coming in and is going to start working cheaper for him. Maybe he gets fired, laid off because of this new workers coming in. Maybe he doesn't get laid off, but you're going to see a lot of Americans, people born and raised in the United States, they're going to be upset because these new immigrants are going to enter these cities where the infrastructure doesn't exist to take care of them. So These cities, a lot of them, I mean, the police are just getting established in some of these cities. Some don't have proper sewage. You know, New York's only getting running water in the 1790s. Even then, it's like with wood pipes. So they don't have proper water. Again, there's going to be food issues. They certainly don't have the buildings for these newly arrived immigrants. So what's going to happen is, again, a lot of these workers will start moving into these areas where they can find living, you know, where they can find an apartment or something, and you'll get a lot of families moving into a single apartment, and you're going to get this overcrowding in areas like this pictures of the 5 Points in New York, where all these different immigrant groups move in, and they start working cheaper than workers have been working before. They're making low wages. Again, it's better than dying in Europe, but now you're in this area, there's not going to be proper police, proper sewage, you're going to be living in a single apartment with a lot of other people, horrific conditions in general. Crime's going to go up, and again, sewage problems, that kind of thing. But again, the immigrants are going to have to deal with it because of the alternative is dying in Europe. So we see this dramatic growth in cities. At the same time immigrants are moving in, a lot of the native-born Americans are going to look here and say, I just lost my job. I can't work for the wage this guy's working for. I don't like the changes brought on. More people are speaking French, German, stuff like that. I don't like the crime, stuff like that. And you're going to see a lot of Americans make the decision right around the same time, 18, 15, 16, 17, 18, to pick up and leave these cities in the east and move west. So these immigrants are going to contribute to economic growth because they're going to allow factory owners to produce stuff cheaper because they don't have to pay as much a wage. So this is going to mean goods sell cheaper. But again, these some workers are going to be pushed out by this increase in immigration. Well, this is going to lead to westward expansion because if you don't stay in the east, you got to go somewhere. Well, a lot of Americans are going to in the north are going to look to this northwest territory, which is going to be a lot more appealing to people than it had been prior to the War of 1812. A lot of this owes to the fact that these Northwest Indians had been forced, when the British called an end to the war, the British had essentially left these Northwest Indians without an ally. Now you no longer have the British to help you out. Tecumseh had died, and you're going to see groups of these Indians basically looking and saying there's nothing to hold these Americans back. And again, a lot of these groups had fought against the United States, and as a condition of surrendering the United States, they're going to be forced to trade their land for smaller plots of land. So you'll see, for example, Tecumseh's Shawnee tribe, I think it's 1820, they trade a huge portion of their land in Indiana for just this tiny acreage of land. They basically replace, I'm making up a number here, 1,000 square miles of land, trade it for 20 square miles of land. Other Indian groups will trade their land here for land west of the Mississippi River. So all this area where you had this threat of Indian attacks that was pushed on by the British after the War of 1812, that's no longer a threat. So you have these people in the east, they see this land that's no longer threatening. They're able to get over to this land much easier, or at least through later in the 18-teens, 1820s with this transportation revolution. And they're going to realize if I move to these areas, I can buy cheap land from the U.S. government, who's just acquired it from these Indians, and I can get the goods to market on these new roads. And again, I can escape this area where I have workers coming in working cheaper for me. So you'll see a lot of Americans take advantage of this changing situation and move to Indiana and Illinois. Contributing to this massive push to the west is the fact that wheat prices are going to skyrocket 1816, 1817, 1818, and these areas are great for growing wheat. So this area particularly, Illinois, Indiana, these areas are fantastic for growing wheat. It's just whatever's in the soil, the environmental conditions, and the wheat prices are going to go up significantly. So you're going to be sitting over here, you've just lost your job, maybe to a French worker coming in, and you're looking around, what can I do with myself? Well, the government's just taken this land from the Ohio Indians, Miami Indians, something like that. They're selling it for incredibly cheap over here. This land is really good for growing wheat. Wheat prices are up because that Tambora volcano caused a year without a summer. People in Europe are starving. They're pay high prices for wheat. Well, I might as well move out here, buy a plot of land, and start over out here. So many people are going to move to Indiana, 1815, beginning of 1816, that by 1816, Indiana will have the 60,000 required to enter as a state. They're going to write up a state constitution, enter as a state in the Union shortly thereafter. Illinois, by 1818, has a 60,000 required, and it will petition to come in as a state in 1818. So all of this together means that the North is growing significantly economically, population-wise, because of the immigration, and people are moving into these northern areas, particularly this Northwest territory, because of the transportation revolution. The Indians moved west after the War of 1812. So westward expansion, economic growth in the North is complicated. It involves agriculture, but it also involves industry. Very, very complicated. Now, at the same time you're seeing this economic growth in the North, westward expansion, you're going to see the same thing in the southern states. More people are going to be moving west, and you're going to see the economy dramatically increase. But the reason for economic growth and westward expansion in the South is not going to be as complicated as it is in the North. And as a matter of fact, you can break down the reason for economic growth and westward expansion in the South down to a single word. That's going to be cotton. Okay? Cotton is going to come out of nowhere to be this crop that is going to become the most important crop to the economy of the South, and it's going to remain the most important crop to the economy of the South all the way up until World War II, and actually even a little bit beyond that. So this is going to become the economic backbone of the South. How does this happen? Why does this happen all of a sudden? Well, it's not because cotton's going to all of a sudden become a desired item. Cotton has always been a popular item to make clothing out of. So even still today, if you check the back of your shirt, probably 60-70% of your shirt, maybe the whole shirt's going to be made out of cotton. Cotton is just an awesome breathable fiber. So it's this plant that produces these tufts, and if you weave them into textiles, you can produce stuff that is breathable, that's going to evaporate moisture easily. You're not going to remain all sticky, stuff like that. It's comfortable. It's going to keep you warm when it's cold. It's going to keep you cool when it's warm. It's just a great fiber. I'm not being paid by the cotton industry, although I would, because it's a good plant. Now, before the problem though is prior to the late 1700s, early 1800s, cotton was tough to produce and make clothing out of. And we're going to talk about more of that in a second. So if you want to buy cotton clothing, you probably got to be rich. As a matter of fact, before 1800, about 4% of people had cotton clothing. Everybody else is going to make their clothing out of different material. So if you went and you checked average Joe Schmo's clothing, you'll find maybe a lot of people have clothing of linen and hemp. This stuff sucks. Linen and hemp, it's basically plant fiber. If you're wearing something, it's going to be itchy. It's going to break easily. Not going to be very durable. Leather, some people would maybe have leather clothing. Problem is that stuff's incredibly hot. It can break kind of easily. It can get worn out after a while. It's sweaty, and it doesn't breathe very well. Some people, very wealthy, would have silk clothing. Silk is also gross. It sort of sticks to you. Unless you're looking like Chris Evans or Michael P. Jordan. It's gonna show all aspects of your body, which isn't going to be very appealing. And again, it's going to tear very easily. And you got to get it from China, maybe India, which a long way away. The cost is going to be ridiculously expensive. Didn't have polyester back then. The thing that most people wore clothing made out of was wool, the stuff made out of sheep. But the problem with wool is that it's incredibly hot. It doesn't breathe very easily. It doesn't wick the moisture. So if you start sweating in wool, which you will, it's going to stick to you. Cotton's not like any of that. Again, it keeps you warm when it's cool, warm when it's cool, keeps you cool when it's warm, and it breathes very well. So again, only 4% of people are going to wear cotton, but by 1900, we're going to see that number go beyond 70%. So what's going to happen late 1700s, early 1800s? to make more people wear cotton, and what's going to make this the backbone of the Southern economy. Well, what's going to happen is we're going to see that a number of changes will happen within the cotton industry. Another thing that's going to come along is the market revolution. More people are going to be buying their goods from the market, and a number of things are going to happen to make cotton much easier to produce. So we're going to be talking about this cotton revolution, because really there's no dates for it. You can just say late 1700s, early 1800s. We're just going to start seeing cotton being produced much cheaper, much more efficiently than it could be produced before. So what happens? Well, one thing that's going to happen is you will see in the U.S. South a type of cotton is going to be introduced that's going to grow incredibly well in the U.S. South. So we don't know when this first happens. Probably sometime early 1700s, maybe mid 1700s. You're going to see somebody introduce a type of cotton called Mexican cotton or upland cotton. So in Europe, those who produce cotton, again, even in Europe, most clothing is produced as wheat. If you did have cotton clothing, it's probably going to be bought from Egypt. Egypt cotton is fantastic for weaving. It's got these long fibers. Problem is it only grows really well in Egypt, doesn't grow very well in Europe. Before the 1700s, some of the early English colonists who arrived in the South had tried to grow this Egyptian cotton. Just doesn't grow well in the U.S. Soil. So people try to grow this Egyptian cotton, this long staple cotton, doesn't grow well. Well, 1700s, cotton's, let me put it this way, cotton's not exclusively this Egyptian style cotton. You have other breeds of it, just like you have, different styles of squirrels from one area of the world to another. You get different types of cotton one location to another. There's a Mexican style cotton, and this had actually been worn by the Aztecs. They would have this cotton style armor that was grown in Mexico, and it would be used for clothing by a number of American Indian groups. It started to be grown in the U.S. South in the 1700s. Again, we don't know by who, and it grows incredibly well in the South. This upland cotton, whereas Egyptian cotton doesn't grow well, upland cotton everywhere. You just throw it on the ground, and it grows incredibly efficiently. You barely got to do any tilling, anything like that. The problem is this Mexican or upland cotton, it's got short staples. So the Egyptian cotton's got the large puffy balls that you can just basically pull the stuff out, create cloth really easily. The upland cotton has these bowls that just basically, they've got tons of seeds in them, and when you try to remove the cotton fibers from the seeds, first of all, it's time consuming because you've got the seeds, the fiber's going to stick to it, and then you're going to tear the tiny short hairs of the cotton, and this is going to be incredibly difficult to weave these short hairs into fabric. So the Egyptian cotton's easy because it's longer fibers. You can weave those much easier. Short ones are difficult to weave into fiber, especially when you rip them when you're trying to remove the seeds. So you've got this stuff that's hard to weave, and it's very labor intensive to remove the seeds. Very labor intensive to pick it as well. We'll come back to that in just a second, but very labor intensive to remove the seeds. So nobody really grew the upland cotton until the late 1700s, when you see two inventions are going to make this upland cotton more efficient to manufacture. One of these inventions is going to come along, and it's called the spinning jenny. I don't have a picture of the spinning jenny here, but basically this is an invention that you can run the short staple fibers through it, and it turns it into cloth much easier. So it's able to weave the short fibers together much more efficiently. The other invention, this one's going to come out in 1793, is going to be something called the cotton gin. This is invented by this guy named Eli Whitney. What Eli Whitney, he's not even from the South, he's not somebody that would be producing cotton, but he sees the difficulty in removing the seeds of cotton, and he's going to develop what's essentially a comb. I mean, it's more complicated than that, but you run the cotton through it. So you just basically take the bowls, and instead of pulling the seeds out, you run it through this comb, and at the other end you're going to get this cotton with the seeds removed, and the cotton fibers are for the most part going to be preserved. You don't rip them as much as if you were doing it by hand. So it's going to be about 10 times more efficient to run it through this gin than it would be for humans to pick the seeds out of it. So one person can clean as much cotton as it would take 10 before the cotton gin. All right, so we have the introduction of this cotton gin. We have the spinning jenny technology like this cotton gin, which are going to make it much easier to produce. And again, at the same time, you're starting to see these factories in the north with these steam looms that are going to start saying, hey, if you can send us cotton, we'll be able to turn it into cloth much more efficiently. Our industry's starting to grow up here for all the reasons we talked about before. So you'll see a lot of Southerners say, now I can make a profit off this. So just about anywhere in the South that's capable of growing cotton will start growing cotton. You're gonna in order to send to these factories in the north, and also I should point out factories in Britain as well. Even though the United States is encouraging industrial growth in the north, Britain's still out there, the world's leading manufacturer, and they're gonna say, man, people really want to wear cotton clothing because it's way better than wool clothing, linen clothing, that type of thing. So if we can produce it, which it sounds like we can now for cheap, we're going to find customers. So think about this going along in conjunction with the market revolution. Transportation revolution is going to contribute to this as well. If you're producing cotton and you want to get to market now, you can do it much more efficiently with stuff like steamboats. So basically what we see in the South is people that would be maybe raising rice or raising tobacco. They clear out their fields because they know that if they grow cotton, northern markets are going to buy it, people in Britain are going to buy it, and these manufacturers are going to sell it, and they're going to find customers because now they're going to be making it much cheaper than they can before. All right, so what all this means is that this cotton revolution is going to lead to rapid westward expansion in the South. Basically, Southerners are going to look around and say, I'm making a ton of money off this if I can find a place to grow cotton. Again, people already settle in these areas of North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia. They'll just rip up the fields from what they're growing before, start growing cotton. Others are going to start looking to places like here. We just had the Creeks sell over most of Alabama to the United States, part of Georgia. A lot of this land happens to be great at growing cotton. You'll start seeing people move in this area, buy the land from the United States, again ceded to the U.S. by the Creeks as a result of the War of 1812. And people are just going to start spreading into this land. They'll start moving into land here. Basically, if it's not land under treaty to an Indian tribe, the U.S. government owns it, and they're going to start selling it off to these people to grow cotton. And by the way, this is something we'll talk about later. You had groups like the Cherokees, Chickasaws, Choctaws. They have treaties, but they'll start seeing people creep up on their land to grow cotton. So this is going to result in this rapid westward expansion. Any land that's available, people start growing cotton because they're going to make money off of it. So rapid westward expansion. So much expansion, so much is going to be pushed on this development of cotton that it's almost going to become a singular crop in the South. Now, up here in the North, you're seeing industrialization. You're also seeing agriculture. You're seeing people producing different types of products. Again, textiles, shoes, things like that are being produced in the North. So if one of these things doesn't do well, you have other areas of the economy that are going to continue to be producing. So the North is a very diversified economy. What's going to happen here in the South, and especially this deep South, which is these cotton growing areas, is just about anybody, because of this new profitability of cotton, that can grow cotton starts growing it. And so it becomes almost a single crop economy, which is great in years when cotton does well because, hey, you make a lot of money off of it. But let's say the market gets flooded, price of cotton's going to go down, nobody's going to buy it. That's going to be a problem. There's also going to be problems when you get things like boll weevils come in. Maybe they come in a year, clear out your cotton crop. That's going to be problematic. As a matter of fact, this area of the South becomes so dependent on it. It's going to be until World War II, and you see industrialization coming to the South. This is going to be the main moneymaker here in the South. And if you're not growing cotton here in this region, you're probably growing food to sell to the people who are growing cotton. As a matter of fact, there's a big argument whether or not the South could sustain itself, even though the South can grow corn really easily, rice really easily. They're actually going to be buying a lot of food from this Midwest area of the North because they don't want to use their fields to grow food because they'd rather use that land to grow cotton. All right. So it's actually going to cripple the development of the South because it's going to be so singularly focused. The economy is not going to be very diversified like the North's economy. Probably the biggest effect that's going to happen from this expansion of this cotton and this cotton revolution is going to be it will institutionalize slavery in the South. So at the end of the 1700s, the United States was in this period when Enlightenment thought was prominent. During the Constitutional Convention, people are talking about getting rid of slavery. Northern states during the American Revolution started getting rid of slavery, either outlawing it entirely or putting in place measures to slowly get rid of it. By the early 1800s, pretty much all these states had gotten rid of slavery or were in the process of getting rid of it. Again, slavery had been banned in the Northwest Territory. So these states had gotten rid of it. And then the thought was that these other states are eventually going to get rid of slavery. It was going to make its way down here. Now at the Constitutional Convention, the southern states are going to argue we know slavery is morally wrong. We're going to get rid of it. Our economy can't handle it if we get rid of it right away. But the thought was we're going to get rid of it. And you see this with the Southerners approving the Northwest Territory, no expansion of slavery into this region. Well, and they're actually legitimately thinking that. Not only is there Enlightenment thought, but prior to this Cotton Revolution, slavery had become less profitable. So what you'd seen in places like Virginia and North Carolina is land starting to grow fallow with traditional cash crops. So stuff like tobacco removes nitrogen from the soil incredibly easy. So a lot of this land that used to be capable of growing tobacco simply just can't grow it anymore because the nitrogen is not there. So it's just not as profitable to grow these cash crops. Rice that started facing competition from other rice growing areas. So people that used slaves to grow cash crops that might have made money, a significant amount of money growing tobacco in the 1600s, early 1700s, they're simply not making as much money about it. So you throw the Enlightenment thought in there and the fact that slavery is not making much money, or not nearly making as much money as it was before, it is very plausible to think that the South would have eventually gotten rid of slavery by the mid-1800s, except it's not going to happen because slavery is once again going to become extremely profitable because of this new cotton crop, or because of this explosion in the profitability of cotton. Basically what you're going to see is those who own slaves start to see that if I use these slaves to pick cotton, what I can do is I can basically remove the oh boy, I don't know why I went back all the way up here. I pressed this wrong button again. They'll basically, slavery removes the single bottleneck that remains with the production of cotton. So now you can clean cotton much more efficiently. This stuff in the north is going to allow this cotton production to be much more efficient. But the problem is picking cotton is going to take a lot of labor. So this is the only area where the machines can't replace human beings. So what's going to happen is those who own a lot of slaves, maybe before the Cotton Revolution they're using for rice or tobacco or something, they're now going to devote these slaves to cotton, and they're going to be the ones that are going to highly profit off this new cotton revolution. You're going to see guys like John C. Calhoun. John C. Calhoun was from South Carolina. He was born into a wealthy slave-owning family. Like other slave-owning families, they hadn't been making as much money in the late 1700s as they had been prior to this time. But John C. Calhoun, his father, is going to be one of the first to rip up his fields and start growing cotton. This upland cotton, which he's then going to sell to factories, clean out with the cotton gin, sell to factories in the north. And because he had slaves to pick the cotton for him, he's going to start making a significant profit. So much of a profit, he's going to start buying more land and more slaves. And this is going to allow John C. Calhoun's father to basically put together a self-running plantation to where he doesn't even have to pay attention to the production of cotton. He'll hire an overseer to watch the slaves. He'll hire cooks to feed the slaves, or I shouldn't say hire, he'll use slaves to cook for the slaves. And he'll have this self-running thing. And this is going to allow John C. Calhoun's father it's going to give him expendable capital. And what this expendable capital will allow him to do is to do things that poor Southerners can't do. Hire tutors to teach children and take time away from working. If you're another Southerner, you're going to rip up your land and grow cotton, but because you don't own slaves, you're engaged in this stuff every day, you're not making that much money, so you're not going to be able to get a tutor for your kid, and you're not going to have time to do anything else. John C. Calhoun's father is going to be able to not put his son to work immediately because he has slaves doing this work. He's going to be able to give his son an education, and slavery is essentially going to allow John C. Calhoun to go into politics. He inherits the slaves and this land from his father, and whereas other non-slave holding white Southerners are going to have to work, pick cotton, or do whatever, John C. Calhoun doesn't have to do that because he has slaves doing this stuff for him. Well, John C. Calhoun's going to go off. He's going to serve in Congress for South Carolina. He's later going to serve as Secretary of War for James Monroe, and he's able to do things that again, non-slave holding Southerners aren't going to do. And what you're going to see is these guys who are able to do what they're going to do because they're starting to make money off cotton and slavery. When they get into power, what they're going to do is start using this power to defend slavery. This is part of their identity. This is how they got there. And so when they start to see Northerners who, again, you go to a generation before, people were saying slavery is wrong. Northerners are still saying that, but they'll say it, and they said it to Southerners prior to this Cotton Revolution. Southerners would say, yes, we're in the wrong, we're changing things. Now they say it. You're going to get guys like John C. Calhoun who are going to say, why are you challenging me morally? This is part of my identity. Slavery wouldn't be part of the slaveholders' identity before this Cotton Revolution. Now it's going to be part of their identity. Essentially, you can think of this as getting cotton in the brain, and this is going to get these Southerners to actually start defending slavery as a moral good. As a matter of fact, John C. Calhoun will eventually come up with this speech saying slavery is good for the slave and it's good for the slave owner. It's a positive good. That's a far cry from what people were saying at the Constitutional Convention, that this is something we need to get rid of. And again, the guys who are going to be serving the South are going to be guys like John C. Calhoun. As a matter of fact, they say 3 to 5% of the South's population is going to produce 90% of the South's cotton, and this 3 to 5% is able to produce it because that 3 to 5% is going to be owning most of the slaves. And so the South, those white Southerners, so only 25% of Southerners are going to own slaves. Only a small percentage are going to own enough slaves to basically have these self-running plantations. That small percentage is going to be the ones representing the rest of Southerners, and they're going to start defending slavery when they get to Congress. So if you want to see how much this cotton is going to be impacting slavery, all you got to do is look at where cotton grows, and then you compare this to a map of where we're going to see slavery at. I mean, it fits almost perfectly. Cotton equals slavery. Now, there are some areas on this map that aren't good for growing cotton. So cotton grows here. Cotton doesn't grow very well in Virginia, Kentucky, Maryland, North Carolina, or Tennessee. So you would almost assume that these upper South states would continue with the push to get rid of slavery because they're not making money off cotton. So why would this Cotton Revolution prevent them from getting rid of slavery? Well, we'll actually see this Cotton Revolution impact politics in the upper South, non-cotton growing areas as well. And so the reason this is going to happen is because in 1808, the United States is going to ban the international slave trade. So after 1808, no more slaves can be brought from Africa. This was something they discussed at the Constitutional Convention. They decided to wait till 1808. Slave trade's wrong. We're going to get rid of it in 1808. They carry through with that. All right, so you have 1808, no more slaves can be brought in, but you have this high demand for slaves. Again, this westward expansion, Mississippi, Alabama added as states shortly after the War of 1812 because of this demand for cotton land. So you have this demand for slaves in these new states. Anybody who has cotton land wants slaves. And at the same time, you have these areas up here that can't grow cotton, and slavery is less profitable. So what you're going to see is a lot of these upper South Southerners, again, you would think, get rid of slavery because it's no longer, we're not making as much money off of it. We'll just do what Pennsylvania did and New Jersey, start to get rid of it. But instead, you're going to see these guys with slaves they don't need, and you're going to see this demand for slaves, And you're going to see a lot of these upper South Southerners decide, I don't have to make money directly off cotton. I can make money by selling slaves to the South. An example of this would be Thomas Jefferson. So Thomas Jefferson is in Virginia. Virginia's not very good at growing cotton. Thomas Jefferson's family had made money growing tobacco using slavery. The land that he lives on is not very good for growing tobacco anymore, sort of gone fallow. Jefferson had tried things like growing wheat. He tried making a nail factory, but he's just not making much money off slavery. So he's sitting around, he owns hundreds of slaves, or he's going to own hundreds of slaves through his life, not making very much money, and he's going to be sitting there in 1816 saying, well, how can I make money? Well, he's going to come to the realization after checking his books, he's going to come up with this quote. The quote is, a child raised every 2 years is of more profit than the crop of the best laboring man. A child raised every 2 years is of more profit than the crop of the best laboring man. What Jefferson and other Upper South Southerners are going to realize is that if I raise and sell slaves south, then I can make a significant profit. So I don't need to grow cotton up here, I just need to grow slaves. And what you're going to see is the beginning of something that historians call the Second Middle Passage. Upper South Southerners, not needing slaves as much anymore, will start encouraging their slaves to have children. Now, this slave breeding, there's no evidence that people had anything like that, although, that doesn't mean that it didn't occur. But what you will see slave owners do for sure is they'll start offering incentives for women to have a number of children. So they'll say, if you have 3 children, you don't have to work in the field any longer, you can work in the house, or if you have 7 children, you can basically retire, and we'll put you in the house in the back or something. And the reason they're doing this to encourage slave women to have children is because they want to sell these children to the South in this this Second Middle Passage. So we talked about the First Middle Passage. This is a passage of taking slaves from Africa, bringing them to the Americas. That's an America's wide thing. This is Second Middle Passage is going to be exclusive to the United States. It's selling slaves from the Upper South to the Lower South, this deep South where these cotton plantations are. As a matter of fact, this is the time period when you get that phrase, selling down the river, or sold down the river. That comes from this time period. So you're an Upper South Southerner, you don't need slaves anymore. What will happen is, a lot of times these Southern plantation owners will send a representative up here to buy slaves from an Upper South Southerner and bring them down that way. Sometimes you'll just see Upper South Southerners sell to a local slave holder or slave trader, and these guys will get these basically slave trains to go down south. Sometimes you get slaves loaded up on boats sent down the river. Other times the slave traders will bring them down for sale in these plantations. Now, this isn't going to be as physically difficult as that First Middle Passage. You're not having to be packed onto a boat or anything like that. But mentally, you got to imagine this is going to be pretty tough. A lot of times it's not going to be the whole family that's sold. It's just going to be a single individual that's sold. So imagine your master. You're used to growing tobacco or picking tobacco for this master. You have your family around you. Then all of a sudden one day you're plucked out. You're stuck in this caravan going south. You're going to be brought to people you don't know. You're going to be forced to work around people you've never met before. You're going to be forced to work on a crop you've never worked on before, and you're basically ripped away from everything that you've ever known. As a matter of fact, a lot of times what they would do is you would have the owners just come in the middle of the night and take children. Usually this one has the mother being taken, but most of the time slave traders would come in the middle of the night so the mother wouldn't cause a fuss, is how they would phrase it, and you would take the slave child and then you would bring them down south. The child's probably not going to see the mother ever again. The mother's not going to see her child, and then the child's going to be raised in the South, and again, eventually they're going to make connections to new people around them, but you're always going to be wondering, what's going on with mom, I miss mom, things like that. So you're going to be brought to the South, and then what happens when you get to these southern areas is sometimes you're sold directly to the owners of these plantations. Other times you're going to be put at markets. Like this is a market in New Orleans where slaves would be brought down from the South, and then they're going to be sold to these cotton planters who had this high demand for slaves. So this is absolutely going to it continues slavery, not just in the Deep South, but in the Upper South as well. Now the Upper South has a reason not to get rid of slavery because they're making a profit selling slaves down to the Deep South. So from about 1800, but especially after 1815 to 1861, the beginning of the Civil War, about 1 million slaves will be sold from the Upper South to the Deep South. So you see 1 million. Now it's the slave population is going to dramatically increase in these areas. There's going to be a significant demographic change. The slave population of these areas is going to remain fairly stagnant because basically new children will be sold down south, and it's just going to be basically a stable slave population. But down here, demographics are going to continue to go up as natural childbirth from these states selling children down south here will increase the population of slaves significantly. So this cotton revolution, even though it's taking place in the Deep South, it's going to have repercussions for the whole South, and this is going to set these two different areas of the United States on very different paths. Before I finish up with this, I should point out that not every Upper South owner is going to do what Jefferson did. Not every owner is going to break apart families, sell children down south. You're going to see some that are going to stick to the principles that were around in the late 1700s, that slavery is morally wrong and it's something we need to get rid of. You're going to have guys like Henry Clay continue to hold on to those principles. So Henry Clay's from Kentucky, Upper South State. Cotton doesn't grow well there. He owns slaves. But he's not going to be like Jefferson. He doesn't want to sell them down south. He sees that as morally wrong, and he sees it as contributing to this slave problem that he thinks America should get rid of. So what Henry Clay is going to do is he wants to eventually bring about the end of slavery, but he knows that he can't just free his slaves. After the Haitian Revolution, you have this, again, push back against the idea of freeing slaves because, again, Southerners don't blame slavery for the Haitian Revolution or racial inequality. They blame free blacks. So he's not going to be able to free his slaves because it's not allowed in Kentucky, or it's very difficult. And also Henry Clay, just about all white Americans at the time, you would say, is racist. He can't envision a biracial society where free blacks can have equal footing with whites. There are some free blacks in the South, but usually segregated in their own communities. So Henry Clay, he believes that slavery is wrong. He doesn't believe in racial equality, and he doesn't want to sell slaves to the South, but he also doesn't just want to free them. So what we're going to see guys like Henry Clay do, and this is also going to be the case with James Madison and also James Monroe, so the two American presidents we just talked about. What they're going to do is they're all going to join the society that forms in 1816 called the American Colonization Society. This American Colonization Society is basically going to try to be a counter to the Upper South Southerners selling their slaves to the Deep South. Instead of, again, in a perfect world, you'd like them to free slaves, make them equal citizens, but again, you're dealing with a racist population here. So what these Upper South Southerners continue to be dedicated to getting rid of slavery are going to do is they're going to start encouraging people to free their slaves and pay passage for them to go to Africa. Now, this is the thing. The vast majority of slaves in the United States by 1816 had been born in the United States. A handful had come before 1808 from the international slave trade, but the vast majority had been born in the United States. So the idea for the American Colonization Society is they would probably use the word repatriate, but it's not repatriating because, most people aren't from Africa, but take former slaves, you free them, and you colonize them in Africa. So this American Colonization Society, beginning 1816, will start taking freed slaves. Masters are supposed to provide them with money for passage to Africa, as well as enough for farming implements and seeds when they get to Africa. And they're going to start transporting thousands of slaves, and this is going to take place from 1816 really to the end of the Civil War. And they're going to start bringing these former slaves to this place, Liberia, so this place in far western Africa. Again, most slaves were born in the United States, most speak English, so this isn't like they're returning home. And even most slaves that were brought prior to 1808, they're not coming from this area of Africa either. So you're going to have these slaves brought to an area they've never been before. They don't know the growing conditions. they don't know the local population. You have people that already live here speaking different language, things like that. And you're going to be, let's imagine this is you, you're thrown out here, you're thrown with some farming implements, and you say you're free, but you don't really have any context what this area is about. Well, this is going to mean a lot of former slaves are going to come to Liberia, and as soon as they get there, they're almost immediately going to die. This is an equatorial region. A lot of slaves, even in the deep south, this isn't as conditions aren't the same as they are in Liberia, so you don't have acquired or you don't have the acquired immunities people born in Liberia would have. So you get over here, you die. Others are going to have arrived. They're not going to have been provided with proper farming implements, proper seeds, anything like that, and they're gonna not be successful when they get to Liberia either. So a lot of people are going to be dropped off here in Liberia, and they're not going to be able to make anything of themselves. They're just going to die shortly after arriving, disease, starvation, stuff like that. Now, a handful of these liberated slaves that will arrive in Liberia are actually going to end up becoming economically successful. And this is one of these sort of depressing things about being human. I don't know what this says about us as humans, but those who are going to end up being successful are the former slaves who are basically going to emulate what they experienced back in the United States. You'll see a lot of former slaves arrive in Liberia, and they will start enslaving the local Liberian population and forcing them to grow cash crops, or which is what basically had happened to them and their ancestors. Or they're going to do what they saw Southerners do with American Indians, start pushing the native Liberians off their land and then using this as their plantation. As a matter of fact, you can go to Liberia and you'll see a number of homes that are built in the fashion of those old Southern style plantations. And we see this native slavery start to emerge in Liberia. Now, these former slaves are actually going to become very successful financially using slavery. Liberia actually becomes a fairly wealthy nation for Africa. But this is going to create a number of problems that are going to carry over into the 20th century. As a matter of fact, in the 1980s, the former slave population and their descendants controlled the vast majority of wealth in Liberia. They only made up 5% of the population, but they made most of the wealth. The native Liberians make up 95% of the population. They're excluded from the upper echelons of politics. There's going to be this civil war in Liberia. We're going to have the native Liberian population eventually oust the former slave population from politics in Liberia. But it sort of it emerges as this product of what the slaves experienced in the Americas they bring to Africa. So this is essentially the United States' child. England colonized a bunch of areas. This is the only area that the United States is really going to colonize, at least in this manner. And it turns out as a replication of the U.S. South. Some interesting facts with Liberia. 1820, Liberia, it's going to former slaves are going to write their own constitution based off the United States Constitution. They're going to found their capital. They're going to call it Monrovia, and this is going to be after James Monroe, the President of the United States at the time, who was also a member of the American Colonization Society and encouraged them, people to free their slaves and send them to Africa. So if you're ever on a quiz show and you're asked what two countries are named after an American president, it's not just Washington, have a capital that's named after an American president. It's Washington, D.C. and Monrovia, Liberia. So anyway, this is to show you that even though cotton takes over the South, it's not as not all Upper South Southerners are going to be caught in the Deep South cotton craze. Now, this American Colonization Society, I should point out, it's not going to be enough to counter the sale of slaves from the Upper South to Deep South, because the vast majority of people are going to realize they can make a profit selling slaves to the Deep South, and so they would rather do that than have to pay their own money to get these former slaves to Liberia. And as a matter of fact, there's only going to be something like 20,000 former slaves that are sent to Liberia. And again, that's compared to 1 million slaves sold from the Upper South to the Deep South. Another reason that American Colonization Society is going to start to lose some steam as time goes on, not just because you have to spend money instead of make money, but also because a lot of Americans are going to realize this isn't the right answer. This is morally incorrect as well. The answer should be, not only ending slavery, but making blacks equal citizens, giving them the same rights as whites. So, divergent opinions. But as we're about to talk about, this slavery issue and the fact that the South is starting to turn their backs on the idea that slavery is something we need to get rid of, it's actually going to lead to some problems during this era of good feelings, which is why a lot of people say it's not the era of good feelings, but it's the era of bad feelings. We'll talk about that next time.